they would say, well, you may not have heard of Robert Balla as an artist before, but I can guarantee you've got a work of his art in your pocket. I didn't have the nerve to tell him that he was in a long line of people who'd made the same joke over and over again. My name is Robert Balla. I'm an artist, a painter, and a designer. As a designer, I consider myself most fortunate to have designed the C series of banknotes, the last Irish banknotes before the introduction of the euro. In 1989, a committee was formed to consider a new series of banknotes, and their theme was the movement of Ireland into the modern age, and they were to select a series of individuals who would appropriately represent that theme. And they selected Catherine Macaulay, Daniel O'Connell, James Joyce, Douglas Hyde, and Charles Stewart Parnell. In 1991, it was decided to hold a competition for a new 20-punt note, which would feature Daniel O'Connell. And artists were invited to submit designs for this new banknote. The governor of the central bank at the time, Maurice Doyle, remarked, and I think quite accurately, that anyone who could get their hands on one of these photocopiers could produce a copy of a banknote that would pass quite easily in a crowded bar any night, and that there was a very definite necessity to introduce new banknotes with increased security measures incorporated in them. I was astonished myself to receive a letter inviting me to partake in this competition because well, certainly I never designed a banknote before. In fact, there was very few people in Ireland alive who'd ever been involved in banknote design. I was kind of delighted, honoured, and a bit nervous about this commission. Much to my surprise, I had a letter from the bank saying I had won the competition, which I certainly didn't expect. This is a £20 note. It obviously features the portrait of Daniel O'Connell, which is based on a print in the National Gallery by John Gubbins. I think it's quite an interesting kind of quirky look to O'Connell. In all the official portraits, he looks a bit serious. The back of the note features the forecourts, an obvious reference to the fact that Daniel O'Connell was a very well-respected lawyer. And also, because he was involved in the repeal movement, I have a copy of a document that O'Connell signed, which is seeking the repeal of the Act of Union 1801, which got rid of our Parliament in Ireland and joined us into the United Kingdom. The central bank, when they first met me, said they knew about my predilection for slipping little things into pictures and various things, subversive notions, and they said, we'll have none of that, please. What I did in this note, and nobody spotted it, is the wording in the document. From seeking the repeal of the legislative union with England by all peaceable, moral and constitutional means until a parliament be restored to Ireland, but so as not to offend our neighbours across the Irish Sea, I put the dome of the forecourts over with England here, so no English people would find the note objectionable. There was a very definite necessity to introduce new banknotes with increased security measures incorporated in them. I got a briefing document from the central bank which kind of resembled a telephone book. There was so much information in it. Included in the briefing document was a photocopy of a talk given by the governor or director of the Bundesbank in Germany, stating quite clearly that a banknote is a security document and not a work of art. So that was a chilling reminder of the job I had in front of me. Oh, James Joyce, 1993. I was delighted that they had selected Joyce as one of the subjects for the notes. The first bit of trouble I ran into was the desire of the bank to have James Joyce smiling on the note, and also that he be bright-eyed. I've never seen him smiling in any photograph. These are some of the images I was looking at, and you will see how there's no smiles here, and yet there is a wry smile there which has been introduced, and also the eyes, very visible eyes in it, which has resulted in, well, a different kind of James Joyce. I was aware of, he had chronic bad eyesight, so it seemed inappropriate to me to have such, wide eyes. Stephen Joyce remarked, Joyce's grandson, that I had my view of his grandfather. He had a different one. In the background, there's a 19th century topographical view of Dublin Bay looking all the way down to Wicklow. It's based on an engraving done in the 19th century, so impossible to achieve. Nowadays you could achieve it with Google Earth or something. The imagination of the artist then to be able to kind of look down on all of this, I thought it was interesting. The back of the note features Anna Livia, one of the gods of Irish rivers, which were sculpted by Edward Smith on the Custom House in Dublin. And there's a map in the background of the centre of Dublin with the Liffey flowing through it. That's actually a plate of the engraving. Oh, there we are. It's an engraving of the head with Finnegan's Wake. I decided to use the opening lines of Finnegan's Wake. River run past Even Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. In the Mint in Sandyford, the fact that they print banknotes there, the security was amazing. There was a double perimeter, and both the guards and the army guarded the place, and getting in was a bit like, getting into a foreign country through security, etc. But they don't have facilities for making plates, so it was necessary to find a company, somewhere who would have this facility. The one we decided to go with was Giesecke and Devrient in Munich. The portraits on the notes that they had printed we thought were excellent, and that was what actually prompted the central bank to go to Giesecke and Devrient to create the plates. It's one of the plates for the £10 note with the portrait of Joyce on it. So there was a lot of translating going on, etc. And I asked at one stage in the meeting who was the person who did these portraits, and they said, it was a man called Antonio Lopez, an engraver who worked in the place in Munich. So I asked to see him, and I just looked at Lopez and said, "Habla usted español?" And he said, "Sí." And it resulted in a wonderful relationship I had with him as a collaborator in this project. The way we worked together when we finally got going was, first of all, I had to get my image approved by the bank and our central bank. So I would do a small little oil painting of the portrait, which would go and be discussed obviously by the board or whatever, and it would come back, yeah, that's fine. And then I would do a drawing of the little painting, and I would send that to Lopez, and then he would do a drawing of my drawing, and that would come back to me for my approval. He was a very good artist, so I always approved, and then he would start engraving the copper plate. In a month or two, he would take a pull, a proof of what he had done, and send it to me, and I would look at it, and mostly it was absolutely fine. But if a correction was necessary, I would do a little correction and send it back to him, and then he would make that correction or whatever it might be. It took him roughly 6 months to do an engraving for one note. The banknote with Catherine Macaulay came out in 1994. One of the things that was consistent in all the C series was the watermark as a security feature, and I decided it would be interesting from a historical point of view to use the image of Lady Lavery as painted by her husband Sir John Lavery as Kathleen Ní Chulainn, to use that as the watermark. So there is a historical connection between the C series, the B series and the A series. Catherine Macaulay was a very interesting subject because a lot of people were critical. One, why would you put a nun on a note? Secondly, would this be offensive to our friends and colleagues belonging to different religions? I felt that was all wrong, because when I researched Catherine Macaulay, I found her a really interesting woman. She came from a fairly privileged background, but felt very strongly about the conditions that the poor were experiencing in Ireland at the time, particularly girls, young girls, in the context of healthcare and education. So she set up a charitable approach to these areas. Unfortunately, it seems that she ran into some opposition from the Catholic Archbishop of Dublin, who saw her activities as a challenge to his authority. Unless she formed an order of nuns, that he would close down her operations or whatever. As a consequence of that, she formed the Sisters of Mercy, and with the sole objective of providing healthcare for young working class girls and education for them as well. And I felt that was pretty radical for the time. When she died, the order discovered they didn't have an image of her. They commissioned an artist to paint a nun that they selected in the order that looked most like Catherine Macaulay. The portrait I have of Catherine Macaulay is technically not of her, but of a nun who looked like her. This is a photograph of my drawing of Catherine Macaulay, which the nuns were delighted with. On the front of the note, she's there. Behind her is the Mater Hospital, which of course was the hospital that she founded. The engraving has to be done on exactly the same size as will be printed on the banknote. This kind of high quality engraving, at the time I believe there was only about 6 people in the world who could do this. It's literally hand cutting the copper to create this portrait, and it's a really precise, time-consuming activity. You cannot make a mistake. If the tool slips, maybe 3 months' work is just thrown in the bin. Leaving aside my talents as an artist and a designer, I think anyone who looks at the C series will recognise wonderful work in the portraits, which is courtesy of Antonio Lopez. On the back of the note, there's a school scene. Lots of people thought that this was my daughter, and she gloried on this in school, that she was on the banknote, and she wasn't. It was the bank's idea to use the Mishereaftery an Fille poem on the blackboard. Mishereaftery an Fille, Landochus is gra, Le Sula gan Solus, Le Cunus gan cra.
1995.
1995, okay. The new 50-pound note featuring Douglas Hyde. Previous to this, my friend Antonio Lopez was not madly happy about doing Catherine Macaulay. She didn't have a beard or any sort of luxuriously detailed item. He felt that it didn't give him much opportunities to exploit his skills as an engraver. So when Douglas Hyde came up, I said, you're going to like this one because he has a big bushy moustache, bushy eyebrows, and lots of detail that you can really enjoy working on. The front of it has the Áras an Uachtaráin, the home of the president when we declared a republic. And Douglas Hyde was, of course, the first president of the Republic. In the background, it's a wonderful piece of art, and that is the base of the Ardagh chalice. You can only see this design, which is very small, when you turn over the chalice, because it's within the foot of the chalice. In theory, only the priest saying Mass can see it, or God himself. But it's on our £50 note, you know. The back features the emblem of Conradh na Gaeilge, which was founded by Douglas Hyde. And there's a drawing I did of the Conradh na Gaeilge symbol. Also, a manuscript from the Royal Irish Academy in the background, and an uilleann piper. There's my drawing for the banknote there. I was so thrilled that I had been able to convince the central bank to feature an uilleann piper, because I loved the uilleann pipes, and to have them featured on one of our banknotes was I think, great. Charles Stewart Parnell. The note came out in 1996. He just got through, I think, by the skin of his teeth, because we were moving inexorably to the euro. My colleagues in the Mint were determined to finish the series, so thankfully we completed the series with Charles Stewart Parnell. Or Parnell is the correct pronunciation, but nobody says Parnell Street, you know. I think a really interesting historical figure, and all the controversies that developed because of his relationship with Catherine O'Shea. It kind of relates in a way to James Joyce. The trouble that Parnell got into features heavily in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. So there's a kind of connection there. In the background is Avondale House, which was his home in Wicklow. On the other side, I've taken elements from the wonderful monument at the top of O'Connell Street, the Parnell Monument. There are the photographs taken from the top of the building at the top of O'Connell Street. I had to blag my way in, and I had to I remember being very nervous because there was a chance I could fall off the roof. Right up at the top, there's a kind of Torch of Freedom, and they're all incorporated in the back, with that statement by Parnell, which I think is very significant, that no man has a right to fix the boundary to the march of a nation, etc., etc. And that's, I think, key to his philosophy. These are all plates of the Parnell. Contained in the £100 there are ivy leaves, and that was Parnell's symbol. And there's ivy on the front as well. So hopefully a lot about Parnell is connected and put on the note, which will be there for posterity. Well, thinking back on the decade when the notes were in circulation, they were received pretty well. I was amazed by that. But I always remember when the first one came out, which was the £20 note with Daniel O'Connell, I was naturally chuffed. I thought this was fantastic, and I was really proud, not just of the work I did, but the work the whole team did, and the work that Lopez did in Munich. I remember it was either the first day or the second day when it came out. I went with my wife to the cinema, and we were queuing up, and I noticed there were two young girls just ahead of us in the queue, and one of them pulled out the note, and they were looking at it, and I was so full of false pride, I suppose. I was on the verge of saying, "Oh, by the way, I did that." And one of them held it up and turned to the other one. "Did you ever see anything so shite?" And I kept my mouth shut, I have to say. But that was unusual. Generally speaking, the response was pretty good. There was no campaign against any note in particular. Generally speaking, they were well received. For a start, I feel myself most fortunate to have been asked to do this, to design the last Well, when I started, we didn't realise it was going to be the last series of Irish notes because the euro was very distant on the horizon. Banknotes in particular are a really important signifier of national identity for a country. Like in the early days of this state, the government, the Free State government, was determined to bring out notes because they didn't want Irish citizens walking around with a picture of the English monarch in their pocket. They couldn't get Irish banknotes out fast enough. In fact, we were busy stamping English banknotes with Saoirse na hÉireann on them, and even coins were being overstamped because we recognised that this was an important signifier of our identity and of our independence. So I think they're very important, and I'm proud to have been asked to design banknotes for my country. Disappointed that we still don't have them, but that's life and that's history. I suppose as an artist, you're always kind of concerned about legacy, because often the rewards when you're alive are minimal. But when you do something, you like to think it will live on after you. And I'm inclined to hope that this series of notes will always be there somewhere and remembered. I clearly remember Percy Metcalfe's coinage. I think everyone, who's old enough remembers all his wonderful coins with the Irish wildlife on them, domestic animals as well. They are superb, and I would like to think that, if Percy's up there, I'll be trotting after him.